Great. Hi, everyone. Kate, thank you so much for this opportunity and for having me here. Um, I just want to say, first of all, that if any of you are ever asked to do this kind of artist lecture series in the future or give any sort of lecture of your work, I highly suggest doing it because I kind of learned a lot about myself putting this presentation together, and just kind of reaffirmed some of the things I've been interested in all these years. So it's nice going through my photos and putting this all together. So Kate, thank you for that. um, this also is kind of, there's a ton of photos, and I'm going to kind of go through a little bit of history of my work. And then if there's some time at the end, I have just photos I've been collecting on my phone. I use my phone a lot to kind of start this visual library, and I reference it often to, make work from, or just daily inspirations of pattern and texture and all this stuff. So if there's time at the end, I'll go through some of those photos as well. So let's just begin. Um, just a little creative and academic background here. So I know we all start somewhere with an artist career. And I put this place called Scribbles and Giggles down because it's actually a place where I started doing art after school, but it's also the first place that I became a teacher at and fell in love with teaching. So I started going to this place when I was about 6 years old. And when I was, I think, 15, I started teaching my own classes. I was teaching pre-kindergarten classes, third grade, all the different grades up through like seniors in high school when I got to be in my mid-20s. And I don't know, I fell in love with teaching then. I became, confident in the classroom. So I always just like to put that there. I studied at SSU, got my bachelor's of fine arts in painting. And before I graduated there, I went and did a summer at Temple University, Tyler School of Art in Philadelphia. I found an ad in an Art in America magazine. There was an open call for this summer intensive program, and it sounded really interesting. So I applied, I was accepted. There was a cohort, I think, of 18 of us, and we lived in Philadelphia for a full summer and were exposed to all different artists and new input. It was really fascinating. And then years later, I went to CCA, California College of the Arts, for my master's in painting. I'm just going to show you this one photo or these two photos of the work I was doing when I was at Sonoma State, just to kind of give you a visual of how much my work has changed over the years. So when I was at Sonoma State during this time, I was really interested in kind of architecture and space, and I was studying some realism in painting, but I was really wanting to kind of mess it up with some abstracted brushstrokes. And so these are some of the final works of my time there. I believe they were both in my BFA show. So this is kind of the work I was doing then. 3 years later, I decided going to grad school was the right option for me. I knew I wanted to continue teaching. Like I said, I really fell in love with teaching, and I wanted to teach college art because I was kind of tired of teaching children and having to discipline them half the time. So I really wanted to teach adults and have real conversations with them. So I went for a master's degree, and unfortunately, it was about, I think, 3 months before my program started. I had lost my father, and it was devastating and tragic. And a lot of my work really became about that and became about my grief. And still having an interest in architecture and space, that kind of spread to home and house a lot. So here's just a couple of images from that time. These houses on the right, the kind of paintings, each of them are only, I think, 6 by 6 inches. and I mixed all my own grays. I was feeling really somber. But these are two of my house and then a couple houses in my neighborhood. I think in total I did about 8 of these paintings. And then on the left side, I did a whole bunch of blind contour drawings of different parts of my house, the exterior, the interior, and again, more houses in the neighborhood. This is some work still from my master's program. And if you feel like the images are actually blurry here, they're not. I did this triptych of, still thinking about space, but also memory and talking a lot about home and house. These paintings to me were this memory I have of being sick in my childhood bedroom and looking down the hall and just seeing the light from the different windows and the hallway and the couch cushions and all of that kind of pieced together. So this is actually manipulated photographs of wallpaper that I've blurred and then adhered them to wood panels. So there's some wood panel underneath all this and some acrylic paint, and really just exploring with putting all this together. Here's a studio shot from my time in grad school. I was cutting up old paintings, putting them on new paintings. I really felt encouraged to explore and experiment in my grad school timeline. So I was really just trying a whole bunch of stuff. Here's another great example of that. I actually made a fort in my studio at one point. It was, I forget what class it was, but we were encouraged to do something totally different than what, our main focus was. And I remember the prompt was something about taking a quote from a living artist as well as a quote from a dead artist and incorporating that into this project. And if you see on the right-hand side, I had kind of painted out the word safe zone. And this is a reoccurring motif in the artist Squeak Carnrath's work that I just really resonated with at this time. Again, going to grad school, feeling all this heavy grief, not really telling anyone I was grieving either. So I decided to make kind of this safe space of, bed sheets and objects and items from my house and things like that. And then I invited my whole class into this fort and we all kind of sat around together and it ended up being really nice. And then I graduated. I got my master's. Yay. And in the bio that Kate read aloud, she did mention this artist collective that I created with 3 colleagues from my master's program. And I'll just talk about it briefly, but it's something I'm really proud about. And if there's any of you out there that, are inspired by creating a group or a collective, I totally encourage you to do it. So when you get outside of a school environment, it's not always easy to find critical eyes, right, on work. So, and also that just camaraderie of making and being in an art studio together, it's not always easy to find. So the 4 of us wanted to keep that momentum, and we decided to get a studio together in San Francisco. We got a studio. It was big enough for all 4 of us. And then one of us got an opportunity to go teach at the University of Kentucky. And he's like, well, I can't say no to that. I got to go. So he took off, and instead of incorporating his space into our own, we thought it'd be really interesting to offer that space to other artists in need in the area. I mean, everyone needs more time and everyone needs more space, especially in San Francisco. So we thought we could offer, if you see this photo here, it is this 8 by 10 wall, that desk and that chair. So we thought, why don't we start a residency program? We started a residency program. We applied for funding. We got $5,000 from the Southern Exposure Alternative Exposure Grant. I highly recommend looking into that group. They give out tons of money all the time, every year. So they gave us $5,000. We then put out an open call for artists in the area that just needed, some space. We offered 30 days in our collective studio. We also gave them a $300 stipend, and they could use that money on whatever they wanted. And then a 3-day solo show at the end. We had a small gallery space in front. And this was hugely popular, and it was so much fun getting to meet new people, support artists. And we did this residency every other month in the year of 2017. So I'm very proud of this project. So in between those months of the residency, we also decided to host a critique group. Because like I said, it's not always easy to find critical feedback from others when you get outside of school. So we held a critique group one Saturday every other month in between the residency months. And artists were able to bring their work to our studio space. We had 3 artists in 2 hours, and each artist got about 40 minutes of feedback, whether they wanted to talk about their work first, whether they wanted to get a cold read. It was so much fun, so popular. Every artist was so thankful. And we got people from, just talking to others. And we got a scientist come one time, and she's like, I don't know anything about art, but this is what this reminds me of. It was just such a nice community that we created. I'm really proud of this. Okay. So now let's go more into my work. So let me see here. This quote says, sometimes it's best to leave your brain at the studio door. Don't always let all your knowledge get in the way of your experimenting and exploring. And to me, I kind of have to remind myself of this a lot, especially coming out of an undergrad program or a master's program. We absorb so much information. We absorb so much, feedback, and we are reading and we're writing and we're researching. And sometimes I just feel like I know too much. And sometimes it gets in the way of my experimenting and my exploration of materials or concepts. So I just wanted to put this out there in case anyone else needed a little reminder. To just kind of sometimes leave your brain at the studio door before you walk in. So when I got out of grad school, I didn't know what I wanted to paint. I felt a little bit of freedom of, I can do whatever I want now type thing, but I also didn't know what I wanted to do. It was during the 2016 presidential election was coming up. I started just getting these wood panels and doing like a painting an hour. Every day I'd get to the studio and just make one painting in 1 hour. So these are just some of those paintings. It's hard to not feel sad with so much noise. I was definitely feeling, just times were changing. Times were changing. And this is just kind of my response during that time. There's also a creative reuse center in San Francisco called Scrap that I used to frequent all the time when I lived there. And they have tons of things like art-related stuff and everything, just from buttons to, I don't know, filing cabinets, all sorts of things that are donated. And then, they're on sale for a really decent price. They also have a huge free section. And so I would go there and still trying to get inspiration, not knowing exactly what I wanted to do in my work. I went to the free section and just started collecting fabric swatches and fabric pieces. I would start putting them and pinning them up on my studio wall. and then paint in response to them or use them in my painting. Just really trying not to think too much, think too hard about what it all means, why I'm doing what I'm doing, and just really letting the process take over. So here's just a couple of early works of how I got into some of the later works that I'll show you. And then, okay, so I'm sorry if this feels like I'm jumping around a lot, but that's how it's gonna go. I took a trip to Japan that year, the end of that year, 2016 and to 2017. I was there for Christmas and New Year's. And I was really hopeful to be inspired by something over there. And it turned out I was. The left side is the seat cushion of the Shinkansen high-speed train we took. And I thought it was so bright and beautiful for this train. So I took this photo, and then on the right side here is a tatami mat, and I just really love the order and the structure of the tatami mat. And then so going back through my photos when I got home back to my studio, I just really loved this this connection here. So I painted this, and actually I painted this while I was in Japan. I brought a little watercolor set and put these kind of two images together, and this was my first watercolor painting. I should say that during my time of undergrad and grad school, I was really strictly just painting with acrylic and oil paints. I'd been doing acrylic and oil paint for years and years and years. And, getting out of school, feeling like I didn't know what to paint, but feeling a little bit of freedom. I also really wanted to find like a challenge in my work. I had been feeling like I knew watercolor and oil paint. I mean, I knew oil paint and acrylic paint so well that it wasn't that I was getting boring. It just wasn't that interesting anymore. But I knew I still wanted to paint. So bringing this watercolor set to Japan was really the start of the next 8 years. Learning watercolor is really challenging, and it kept me really interested in returning to the studio every day. I wanted to get better at it, wanted to get better. So I kind of stumbled around for a while. I won't show you all of the stumbled through paintings, but became really fascinated with watercolor, but then also how controlled I can paint with the watercolor. I add this painting here on the left by Candy Jernigan. It's a crumpled up cigarette box, I think. And I just really loved the simplicity of it, but the detail of it and kind of this white space around it. And I think this might have been like the first painting that really started influencing how I would set up more of my works to come. And so the image on the right is, these little free swatches of fabric I would get from scrap in San Francisco. Basically just put them on top of my paper and paint from them. I would paint still lifes. And I'm doing this all with watercolor. So on the left here, you see a bed sheet, a pillow sheet that I've had. Set it up in my studio, pinned it to my wall, and I'm painting from life. So Kate and I were just talking about watercolor and oil painting right before this presentation started, and how different they are and how almost opposite they are. I tried doing a painting in oil kind of during this time of fabric, and it was such a mind trip of, wait, how do I do this again? Because now I'm doing watercolor, which is such an opposite process than oil. So that was a real big trip, something fun to do if you ever are in the same situation. I went to Mexico City one year, and really attracted to the drapery, the curtains. We went to La Casa de Azul, Frida Kahlo's house in Mexico City, and I really loved this portrait of her by Diego Rivera. her in this red rebozo, and I came home and I wanted to make my own interpretation of that piece. And actually, I found an open call for an art exhibition at the Bedford Gallery in Walnut Creek, and it happened to be a Frida Kahlo art show. So I submitted this painting when I was done with it. And the show was so popular and successful that they ended up taking the show on a 3-year national tour, which I had no idea was about to happen until they announced it. So this painting, after it was framed and everything, traveled around the US for 3 years, which was pretty exciting. Here's another piece, and talking about open calls, for a while, I was just applying to all sorts of shows and opportunities, trying to get my work out there. Again, here on the left is my painting next to my still life of the fabric. And then the right is that high altitude exhibition that was in my bio, or mentioned in my bio. It was in New York City. And if your artwork was accepted, they would print it on these banners and it would hang above the garment district for a full summer in New York. And so because I'm already painting fabric and garments, it just clicked in my head, I should probably apply for this. And so it was pretty neat to fly out to New York and see my painting hung up there like that. And then, Instagram, right? Like Instagram has become a tool, I think. And I'm posting my artwork on my Instagram page, you know, uh, and all of a sudden I get an email from a gallery in San Francisco. Hey, I'm really interested in your work. Can you bring some of your work down to show me? And I was thrilled at the time. I thought having a gallery, I made it, or, it's my first one, here we go. And it was a great experience for a while. And so I signed with Hang Art for 5 years. And I had shows every year, and that was great. And I was showing with other artists that they represent. And so I was really kind of developing this fabric kind of motif. I'll go back here for a second. I was also, just being cautious about maybe getting too pigeonholed in that area, painting fabric. I can only paint fabric. I definitely wasn't feeling like that's all I wanted to do. And more on that in a little bit. But I'll go to this next slide. So talking more about, school. When you're in school, you have professors, you have other peers, everyone's, kind of going through the same motions of showing work, critiquing work, making work. And then of course, when you get out of that, it's like, again, not always easy to find some feedback. So I think artist residencies could be another great way to meet new people, like-minded people, make work, have the time and space to make work. So I applied to an artist residency in Truth or Consequences, New Mexico, and really just explored, experimented. I was there for 6 weeks. I had a studio all to myself. I had a little apartment all to myself. I just made work in the desert. I was super interested and excited about the mountain ranges around me where I was living. I was cutting up paintings, weaving them together. These are some paintings in response to those mountains around me. Still talking about fabric and incorporating fabric in it, but I'm cutting them up at this point. And now, if you can see here, it's like a push pin to the wall. So I'm kind of piecing them all together to make maybe a fabric landscape. Here's another painting, still watercolor painting, thinking about the stripes. There was a lot of kind of beautiful stripes and rock formations in these mountains. and, just really responding to my surroundings. I really enjoyed this time, really exploring and experimenting. Again, this is all individual pieces of paper that I cut and collaged and put together. The gradient sunsets out there were fantastic. So I started painting those. I really recommend doing some artist residencies, if that is of interest to you. Came home and still was working through some fabric stacks, more pieces together. Started experimenting a large format. This is a 6-foot piece of paper by, I think, 4.5 foot. Really big for watercolor. Fabric and flight, kind of. I think I titled this one Flightless. And yeah, here's another fabric landscape. I actually really do like this one. And then, so going back to the gallery and gallery representation, I mean, I think it was a really great experience. It did come to an end, and I don't know. Now I'm in a different position of where I'm asking myself a little bit more like, who do I want to work with in terms of maybe a gallery or someone representing my work? But more importantly, like what I want my work to look like. There was a time towards the end of our relationship that I started to feel like they were directing me a little too much for my liking. As you can see, I've tried a lot of different types of work or types of painting maybe, and that keeps me interested and keeps, I think, the work fresh in my eyes. So I don't know, I started to feel a little bit controlled, and I think it's just it's a natural progression to move on, and I think that's okay too. So I learned a lot from that experience. I learned a little bit of what I want in terms of that relationship, and also just making sure that, I'm staying true and authentic to myself. So I say all that because the fabric work was going well. It was selling a lot. It was very popular, but I just got kind of tired of painting it. I wanted to paint something else. I wanted to challenge myself again. I got to a point where I just knew the moves too easily. So I still wanted to paint with watercolor, and I'm showing you these 3 kind of boats right now. I wanted to see, well, what other kind of materials can I paint or, look like the material through watercolor. So I had this little brass music boat. It's about really like this big in person. And these paintings are 40 inches tall by 29 inches wide. And it was just a pure study of, can I make watercolor resemble brass? So I painted these boats, which was super fun. I really enjoyed this process. And then I started getting interested in objects. There was a time where I had painted just objects before, more of a still life setup. And I love these, this kind of like milk glass setup on the left. Again, just placing objects, finding objects. There's a little bit of like a nostalgia feel to some of these objects, I think. Like this cranberry sauce it's just such a memory of mine from childhood. I think it's so funny. And then here's kind of the inside of it. So again, just really finding excitement in my own work, challenge in my own work. These are paintings I did. So we lost a house in the 2017 fires here. And if any of you had, that you might have known or experienced some of the objects that actually survived those fires. So it's like these terracotta pots and different ceramic objects. or stone objects. And I really wanted to kind of memorialize these. So here's some fire relics, I started calling them. We have this big boat art piece in our house. And here, this one's not done. It's kind of in progress here, but you kind of see this red light coming through the window. So I'm just realizing that, I'm really interested in painting like the world around me or the things around me. And again, going back to just putting this slideshow together, this all just started coming to me more recently. Just really interested in the things I surround myself with, the environment I'm in. So again, thanks for this opportunity. Now, I just want to finish up here. So I'm doing some new work right now. I actually have a show coming up in downtown Petaluma on Saturday, December 7th. And it's going to have a bunch of new work that I'm working on right now. But I wanted to show this artist, Terry Powers, because I love the way he's painting kind of his space, and it feels very mundane and cluttered at times, and it's just like these beautiful little snippets of his life. But he also, I don't know if you can see, like on the one on the left, he has these little blurbs that he writes about just how he's feeling that day or what happened that day. And I'm such a writer. I have like a side writing practice. I have journals from, I don't know, since I was a kid. And so I really loved this kind of blend of text and painting and personal story and narrative. So I'm kind of bringing that into some recent work. So over the summer, I took myself onto a very big trip. I went to Morocco, Spain, and Portugal for 4 weeks and had a ton of inspiration over there. But I was going back and looking at all my photos, and I have all these photos of food and drinks and snacks that I'm never going to do anything with. Like, I don't know why I I don't know why I photograph my food. I'm not a food blogger. I'm not anything like that. I enjoy my meals, and especially when they're, interesting or new. So I thought, well, if I'm not going to do anything with these photos, I might as well just paint them and do this semi food blog through painting. And you can see I'm adding a little bit of narrative through writing in each of them. So these are pretty small. They're I think framed, they're 11 by 14. But they're just fun. It's really fun just to do something totally different and not so serious, and still exploring the things that interest me. I think this might have been out of order, but I'll just show you anyways. Some experimentation I've been doing. So painting still with watercolor, still kind of dipping back into the fabric series, but also experimenting for the first time really with cyanotypes. And so these are some photographs I've taken like in Sedona and New Mexico, the landscape there, and creating negatives with them, and then using those, doing the cyanotype process, but now using like the stripes of a fabric for the exposed areas. These are really works in progress, but they're kind of fun and different. We'll get back to those one day, I think. And then here's just some more really recent work that will be a part of my show. I was out on leave from teaching just about a month ago, maybe 6 weeks ago, due to a back injury. I had to take some time off. I was really kind of laid up for about 2 weeks. And, I was thinking about, well, these are two images inspired by my comforter, my bed comforter, and the different stripes and how they were kind of overlapping each other. And because I was laying down for so much, I really just kind of studied these lines and line work, and I would make drawings of them. And then I created these watercolor paintings. So these are just some new works that, it again, going back to finding the fun and the joy in what you're doing, not always being so serious maybe with the work. And I think I have just a few more minutes. I saw an artist do this maybe a couple times in presentations of just some of the photographs we've collected or in our phones. And I'll just kind of share with you a few pairings that, I like for whatever reason, whether it's being out in nature or, kind of collage pieces. Here's just another cyanotype of a film or a little movie I took on the water. Here's some artists that I'm really interested in and how they're exploring through fabric and even presentation is really, I love how this is kind of standing out on the ground or on the floor. Lighting, I've always been interested in lighting. Organization of food. Uh, there's my cat in a box. I do some weaving stuff too. So thinking about fabric and actually wanting to make some of my own kind of textile work. I've done some embroidery. This is not my work here, but embroidery stuff, thread. I love this block printing, stamp making thing here. I love this pairing. This is a beautiful gradient sunset outside my house one day. And then on the left, my friend brought his child over with some crayons, and the crayons got left outside on a hot day, and so they melted. But I really love this pairing right here. More landscape, but again, bringing in that combination of weaving and fabric. I'm cutting things up. It turns out I've been cutting up my paintings for years now. This is another great one, The Manly Art of Knitting. I think I just love the cover of that so much. The Central Coast. It's being an artist, we're open to inspiration everywhere, right? It's all around us. There's my cat again. That's Melvin. Here's a weaving I did, and then I'm pressing it into plaster on a canvas or a wood panel. Just experimenting and exploring. Here's the sofa parade in downtown Santa Rosa. If you guys know about that, it's pretty fun. People decorate and dress up and cart their sofas down the street. I love this. So this is more of the gradients I was doing in New Mexico, the gradient skies. And then I saw this thing on Instagram on the left. I was like, oh my gosh, that's brilliant. I want to try that one day. I still haven't. Some more experiments, cyanotypes with watercolor mixtures. Kind of didn't work so well, but I kind of also like how they turned out. And then these last few ones are just some photos I took of the tiles and patterns from my trip. So I believe this is in Portugal, in Porto, Portugal. We have Barcelona on the left and Marrakesh, Morocco on the right. So attracted to the fabrics, the textiles, the patterns. The mosaics are everywhere. Very much inspired. I love all the colors. It was just so visually pleasing. More cyanotypes, my cat. He's always with me. And I'll just end on this quote. So it's not a quote that I read, but just something that I think is so true. And I think it's a nice reminder. There's no lesser value in doing what makes you happy. It could be anything that you just find the thing that fuels you and run with it. I love that so much. So if, you take anything away from this lecture, maybe just remind yourself that, it's okay to do what you find joy in most, whatever that is, whether it's art or knitting or baking, and just don't let anyone tell you that it's has lesser value. So,
Wonderful. That was great.
oh,
Uh,
good. Thank you.
if you have a question for Jennifer, can you please raise your hand in the reactions? And we'll get those started. Oh, and then we got some in the chat already.
Okay.
We've got two hands raised. Let's start with Connor.
Hi, I was just wondering, how did your education at Sonoma State like prepare you for the rest of your career?
Ooh, that's a really good question. So I was in the BFA program from 2000, well, I was at Sonoma State from 2006 to 2011, did my BFA probably in those last 2 years. And at that time, it was like finally the first place where I felt really inspired and challenged in my work. And I think that had a lot to do with the professors that were there, but also the students that were there. It was the first time I was really exposed to a greater art world than the one I had been exposed to previously, which was really basic and small. So I think it just really showed me how big and how much opportunity there is really out there in terms of art and art making. I think I was still being questioned by my parents at that time, like, what are you going to do with an art degree type thing? But because I knew I still wanted to teach, or I had interest in teaching, I always felt like I was going to go in that direction. But I think it just really just exposed me to what's, New York City. We did a field trip to New York City and down to LA, and just how big the art world is. And there's really space for everybody in every kind of art. So I hope that answers your question.
Ah, perfect. Thank you. I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Catherine.
Oh, Catherine, I can't hear you.
Or we'll move on to Anna. Oh, Catherine's mic isn't working. You can type it in the chat and then I'll read it to Jen. But let's go with Anna.
Hi. So my question was, well, I struggle with motivation specifically when painting. I wanted to ask, how do you keep yourself motivated? And when you've hit a certain point in your painting where you're like, oh, I just don't want to finish it, how do you keep on going?
Oh my gosh, that is such a good question. And actually it's something I actually told my students this the other day, because I gave my students a project last week. It's called an alternative self-portrait. So instead of doing just like a realistic self-portrait, they can kind of manipulate it or add a filter, do whatever, and paint, kind of this alternative portrait of themselves. And one student, she got halfway through and she goes, I just hate it. I just don't like it. I don't want to finish it. And I told her, I was like, okay, I come through this a lot in my own work where we get about halfway or maybe even a little bit further than halfway in a painting. And if you're feeling like it's not going the way that you envision it, or it's not looking as good as you want, just know you're only halfway there. Um, and if it's feeling like it's looking bad, that might be a good thing. I had a professor tell me at one point, like, if it doesn't look like shit halfway through, you're not doing it right. I'm like, okay. So I think too, it's also not editing before the work's done, not trying to edit what's not there, or I struggle with this too. I really just really try to push through to finalize it as much as I can, and then edit it, or then figure out what's working and what's not. The first part of your question, I do feel like I'm quite disciplined with my studio practice. I'm really about schedules and making schedules, and being an adjunct professor, teaching schedule is different every semester. So I never know really when or what days I'm going to be in the classroom and then what days and times I'm going to be in the studio. But I really make an effort to be in the studio the hours that I'm not teaching and just kind of round out the day of like a full work day. So if I only have a class in the morning, 9 to 12, I should be in my studio, from 1 to 5. I think that's just something that I don't know, I've been really good about keeping that practice. I also had a professor tell me this, and I think that might be another motivational point is when you get out of school, he said something like about half of you will still be making work in 1 year. And in 5 years, only like 10% of you are going to be still making work. And in 10 years, only 1% of you are going to be still be making work. And I'm such that person where if you tell me to do something or I can't do something, I'm going to totally prove you wrong. So I feel like I'm still keeping that up. So that's just what I'm doing.
Awesome, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. And then Diane is asking, do you still paint with oil or acrylics at all, or do you find watercolor more freeing?
Oh, I in my own work, I am just painting watercolor. I don't know that I find watercolor more freeing, especially how I'm handling the paint and like manipulating the paint. I feel like I'm painting watercolors like I would oil or acrylic paints and how tight I paint it. However, when I teach, I am teaching oil painting and I'll do a little, side painting in the classroom, and I do just love that lushness that oil paint brings, that creaminess of mixing the paint. I do love the viscosity of oil paint. I'm just not really doing that right now in my own work. It's just more exploring watercolors, paper, cyanotype, and fabric. So trying to blend all of those together somehow. Thanks for the question.
Catherine wants to know, what was your first painting sale to a total stranger like?
Oh my gosh. Gosh, I don't know about my first because it's been a little while. I don't remember, but I will tell you that when I was with my gallery goes to a lot of a lot of art fairs in the US, and one of them was Art Basel, or is Art Basel in Miami Beach. And the last year I was with that gallery, he took my work to Miami Beach to Art Basel. He took 12 of my paintings, and they were actually, they were all fabric paintings or paintings of fabric. I sold all 12 of my paintings in that weekend, and that was to all strangers. And that was so exciting and so thrilling. And now they're all on my contacts list. So now I'm sending them newsletters all the time and stuff. But yeah, selling to a stranger, there is a sense of validation in what you're doing. If you ever get to a point where you're like, I don't know what my work's about, I don't like my work, and then somebody comes up and says, hey, I think this is awesome and I want it, that feels really good. I can't deny that. So yeah, thanks for that question. It's a good feeling.
I don't think it ever gets old. I feel like you like get just as giddy with like every sale. You're just like, no way.
Yeah, totally. And then it's like, okay, now I do want to paint another dozen pieces of fabric.
Uh-huh. Nice. Any other questions for Jen? Just a reminder that we don't have class next week because of the holiday. Please do your SETI or course reviews. I don't remember what they're called right now. And our 2 papers are due at the end of during semester finals week. Yeah, Sarah.
Will you speak a little bit about those papers? Do you want, artist reflection papers? Do you want us to format it that this artist visited, I asked these 2 questions, this is what they said, this is what I think about what they said? What are you looking for?
Correct. So when you go onto our Canvas page, there's a whole rubric and like requirements, but basically what you just said, like here, I asked these two artists these questions. This is what they said. This is what I learned. And then you have your second paper, which is the contemporary artist essay, which is just to write a paper on anything about contemporary art. And there is some examples of prompts and that you can use, or you can come up with your own.
Okay, so it doesn't have to be the visiting artist that we respond to. You want us to do like art theory on contemporary art or art
On the
criticism?
contemporary
Or...
art essay, there's a whole list of different examples of what you can write your paper on, but that's not an exhaustive list by any means, and they does not have to be relegated to artists from this series.
Okay, all right, thank you.
All right. And Jennifer, thank you so much for sharing your work with us and everything and your time. And it was really nice. I really liked how you framed your studio practice as well. I think that's one thing that's really hard to kind of keep and maintain a rigorous studio practice. So that is that was really nice to hear. And thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me. Nice to be here.
All right. Well, I'll see you all on December 4th. Please email me if you have any questions. And Jennifer, I will send you the copy of the recording from your lecture. Thank you again.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Okay,
Goodbye, everyone. Have a good holiday.
Hi, Danny.
One.